During the late summer of 1595, a small force of 15,000 warriors stood against a massive army of 100,000 and emerged victorious. On the 23rd of August, a Wallachian ruler wielding a heavy double-headed axe transformed the mightiest fighting force of the Ottoman Empire into a terrified crowd, sinking into their own greed. This story reveals how terrain, tactical brilliance, and absolute daring humbled the strongest military engine on earth. Visualize the scenario. Warriors of the Ottoman Empire, feared across 3 different continents, struggling helplessly within the churning muck. Their massive plate armor pulling them under. Their Grand Vizier, a man ranking second only to the Sultan, flung from his steed into the bog, rescued from a watery grave by an anonymous servant. The Prophet's holy standard, never before taken by Christian troops, tumbling into the filth as 100,000 of the globe's elite soldiers run from an army 6 times smaller. The destiny of the entire continent balanced upon one narrow crossing, barely 20 feet across. By the conclusion of this broadcast, you will comprehend how a single leader's strategic mind converted a swamp into the Ottoman Empire's darkest tragedy. You will learn about the hidden instrument of war that wasn't steel or gunpowder, but simple mud. How a sacred artifact might have altered the trajectory of European history, and the reason the Sultan's personal flag wound up in Christian possession. But here is the detail most chronicles omit. Michael the Brave knew precisely where to place his artillery for ultimate destruction, down to the inch. How? What caused Sinan Pasha, a veteran of infinite battles, to stumble into such a glaring ambush? And why did the Turks persist in storming the exact same lethal bottleneck, feeding wave after wave of their finest men into a guaranteed slaughter? How could the most strictly drilled army on the planet lose all cohesion so thoroughly? How did a prince from a minor territory outwit the Grand Vizier himself? The solutions are found within 6 hours of warfare that demolish the legend of Ottoman invincibility. Amidst the turmoil, a singular image remains, a slave confronted with a decision that would resonate through the ages. Rescue the sinking Grand Vizier or grab his liberty. His choice would shape the future of empires. To grasp how this clash of David and Goliath occurred, we must retreat 3 months into the past. If you are captivated by the hidden tales of history's most pivotal conflicts, strike that like button and subscribe for further legendary war stories. Now, allow me to transport you to the summer season of 1595 as the Ottoman Empire's colossal instrument of war advanced toward what looked like a simple victory. The protracted Turkish war had already devoured tens of thousands of souls throughout Central Europe. For 3 long years, Habsburg and Ottoman troops had smashed together in a violent grind that transformed whole provinces into cemeteries. Yet in the tiny principality of Wallachia, the situation was about to shift. Michael the Brave was never intended to be a soldier king. Installed on the seat of power as an Ottoman subject in 1593, he was anticipated to remain another puppet, forwarding taxes to Constantinople and keeping his Christian population quiet. The Ottomans had made a mistake. Within a few months, Michael started orchestrating the impossible, total freedom from the superpower that had ruled the Balkans for 200 years. The ignition point arrived in November 1594. Turkish moneylenders who had financially suffocated Wallachia for generations were assembling in Bucharest for their yearly payment. Michael attacked first in a synchronized strike across the nation. Ottoman debt collectors and their security details were wiped out. The signal was unmistakable. Wallachia would no longer bow down. But here is where it becomes wild. Michael did not merely revolt. He announced a holy crusade. He dispatched messengers to the Pope, to the Holy Roman Emperor, to every major Christian leader, declaring himself the guardian of eastern edge of Christendom. For the governor of a state smaller than present-day South Carolina to provoke an empire stretching over 3 continents was beyond bold. It was deemed suicidal. Enter Sinan Pasha, the iron hand of the Ottoman Empire. At 75, he had flattened uprisings from Yemen all the way to Hungary. As Grand Vizier, he held total command over the Sultan's military forces. When reports of Michael's defiance arrived in Constantinople, Sinan did not simply rouse an army, he gathered the biggest force witnessed in the Balkans in decades. This was not meant to be mere discipline, it was designed as a warning to any other region thinking of resistance. The political strategy game was intricate. The Habsburgs were trapped in their own fatal wrestling match with the Ottomans in Hungary. Poland observed anxiously from the north. What occurred next contradicted every rule of warfare. While other Christian nations paused, Michael readied himself to confront the Ottoman giant solo. He possessed 15,000 troops, scarce gunpowder, and a few artillery pieces. Sinan was arriving with 100,000 fighters, the empire's supreme Janissaries, bound with supplies and the total guarantee of winning. By August 1595, Ottoman spies reported back to Sinan. Wallachia's fortifications were laughable, simple dirt walls, some rushed peasant levies, nothing that couldn't be brushed aside in a single afternoon. The Grand Vizier grinned. This campaign would conclude by September. But Michael possessed something Sinan failed to foresee, an ideal slaughter zone. The Ottoman war engine that marched into Wallachia in August 1595 was a vision that caused grown men to abandon their homes. Written records detail a line extending for miles, 100,000 warriors in all, although Sinan would meticulously arrange them in distinct waves. The spearhead alone counted between 12,000 and 40,000 elite soldiers, depending on which history you trust. Following them was the primary host, Janissaries wearing their unique white hats, Sipahi horsemen in magnificent plating, and artillery convoys with bronze guns that had smashed the ramparts of numerous castles. The supply needs alone were overwhelming. Every single day, this force ate tons of food. They carried engineers, bridge constructors, and siege experts. This was more than an army. It was a traveling metropolis dedicated to ruin. Sinan Pasha directed from a silk pavilion requiring 50 men to raise, encircled by his private security of 2,000 Janissaries. His council of war featured Hassan Pasha, the empire's greatest cavalry leader, and veterans of wars from Persia to Austria. Facing this monster, Michael the Brave had gathered 15,000 protectors. However, what they missed in quantity, they regained in quality. These were not terrified draftees, they were people battling for their native soil. The heart of the force was 3,000 mercenaries, tough veterans who had fought in legions all over Europe. Backing them up were 7,000 Wallachian foot soldiers, carrying everything from rifles to agricultural tools. The true shock was Michael's mounted force, 5,000 riders who recognized every trail, every creek, every concealment spot in their territory. However, the Ottomans had committed a deadly error regarding Michael's heavy guns. The Wallachian army possessed merely 10 to 12 cannons. Correct. What the Ottoman reconnaissance overlooked was where these weapons were stationed and who was operating them. Michael had hired artillery masters from Transylvania, experts who grasped angles and timing with mathematical exactness. Every gun was situated not for the longest reach, but for maximum destruction at definite locations, spots the Ottomans would be compelled to traverse. Concealed in the woods near Călugăreni were the Secoli reinforcements, led by Albert Kirali, 3,000 Highland fighters who had battled Ottomans for ages. These warriors would not join the fray instantly. Michael had issued specific orders: pause, observe, and attack only when the foe was totally engaged. Waiting would be their blade. This is the moment physics became Michael's partner. The landscape surrounding Călugăreni was a defender's fantasy and an invader's horror. The Neutralized River, while not especially broad, was bordered by wetlands that stretched for hundreds of yards on both banks. In August, following summer storms, this bog was a dangerous combination of thick muck and invisible pits. A soldier in plate armor who stepped off the firm earth might never surface again. The lone bridge spanning the Neutralized was maybe 20 to 30 feet across, sufficient for a trader's wagon, but disastrous for a legion. Any army traversing would be squeezed into a thin line, ideal marks for cannon fire. Yet Sinan's spies dismissed it as a tiny hurdle. After all, Ottoman builders had spanned the Danube itself. What was one minor Romanian stream? Then the slaughter zone exposed its real intent. Michael had invested weeks analyzing this ground. He realized that once a force committed to crossing the bridge, the swampy earth would stop any effective spread. The Ottomans would have to push their troops piece by piece into a natural firing range. The woodlands on both flanks would hide Wallachian maneuvers while channeling Ottoman movements into forecasted routes. On the dawn of August 23rd, both sides assumed their stations. The Ottomans set up camp 3 miles from the bridge, their vibrant tents unfolding across the terrain like a deadly flower garden. Sinan arranged his troops with standard Ottoman precision. The vanguard would capture the passage. Engineers would strengthen the bridge if needed. Then the main body would flood across and smash whatever rabble Michael had gathered on the opposite side. Michael arranged his men differently. The guns were obscured behind dirt mounds, their angles meticulously figured. Infantry stood along the far shore, prepared to dispute any passage. His horsemen waited in the timber, unseen by Ottoman eyes. Every soldier understood his part in the lethal waltz about to start. As sunrise arrived on August 23rd, both armies realized this date would be scripted in gore. Morning fog lifted from the Neutralized swamp as Ottoman scouts raced toward the bridge. These were the empire's best light riders, men who had galloped from the Syrian sands to the Hungarian grasslands. Their task was plain: test the crossing, judge the resistance, return. They never succeeded. Wallachian cavalry burst from the woods like phantoms made flesh. The lead Ottoman scout barely had a second to turn his mount before a Wallachian spear pierced his torso. Within moments, the whole scouting unit was deceased or running, their riderless steeds splashing through the bog in terror. But here is the secret the history texts do not mention. This wasn't accidental brutality. Michael had commanded his troops to let a few scouts flee. He needed them to carry news. He needed Sinan arrogant. Back at the Ottoman base, the Grand Vizier accepted the news with annoyance rather than fear. A handful of enemy riders were anticipated. His spies verified what he already suspected. The bridge was guarded but crossable. The Wallachians had dirt walls on the distant bank, some guns, but nothing his vanguard could not manage. Sinan directed 12,000 men ahead, his supreme soldiers, the ones who had taken citadels from Baghdad to Belgrade. The Ottoman spearhead advanced with drilled effectiveness. Janissaries walked in flawless lines, their orchestras playing war tunes that had pushed fear across 3 continents. Behind them marched the shock troops with climbing ladders and siege gear, prepared to overrun whatever sad defenses the Wallachians had built. The morning light reflected off thousands of helms and blades as they neared the deadly junction. What followed next contradicted all martial reason. As the initial Ottoman squads reached the bridge access, they encountered something unforeseen. The earth, which had looked firm from afar, became dangerous. Steeds started to dip into hidden slime. Soldiers in heavy plating found every stride increasingly hard. The tidy rows began to squeeze and shuffle as fighters sought solid ground. Michael observed from his spot on the distant bank.
He had dedicated 3 months to readying this earth, having his builders redirect tiny creeks to generate extra marsh, hiding the worst spots with reeds and sticks. Now, as thousands of Ottoman warriors clumped up at the bridge mouth, his gun captains made final tweaks to their weapons. The mental warfare had already started. As Ottoman units fought the landscape, Wallachian drums initiated a sluggish, dark rhythm. Then arrived a noise that made seasoned Janissaries hesitate. Church bells. Every chapel for miles around started tolling, their bronze throats ringing over the swamp. To Christian listeners, it was a summons for holy defense. To Muslim fighters, it was a foreign noise that told of the weird territory they were attacking. However, the Ottomans had committed a mortal error. Sinan, resting in his command pavilion 3 miles back, could not witness the crumbling status at the bridge. His junior officers, taught to display drive, chose to push ahead rather than signal issues. After all, these were supreme warriors facing local trash. How difficult could it be? The bridge itself turned into a choke point of legendary scale. Broad enough for maybe 4 or 5 men side by side, it compelled the Ottoman front to discard their tactical shapes. Worse, the timber planks, wet from morning mist and swamp splash, grew increasingly slick as hundreds of boots churned over them. Men at the lead were shoved ahead by the crush of thousands to the rear, unable to withdraw even if they wished to. Here is where soldierly discipline died its initial death. As the front Ottoman sections finally gained the middle of the span, Michael's hidden guns spoke. The opening blast was catastrophic. Solid iron balls crashed into dense files at point-blank distance. Soldiers did not merely drop, they were blasted off the structure into the muck below. The timber frame itself trembled from the blow, knocking more troops off balance. The Wallachian cannon fire wasn't shooting blindly. Every piece had been given a definite sector, their teams practicing for weeks on this specific event. As Ottoman leaders attempted to organize their men and drive on, the second blast hit. This time, the artillerymen had packed grape shot, transforming their guns into giant shotguns that wiped the bridge clean of living souls. Yet Sinan's forces were professionals. Despite the slaughter, Janissary captains rallied their troops for another attempt. Drums pounded the charge, holy flags were hoisted, the empire's greatest foot soldiers got ready to do what they did best, march through the inferno to gain the win. They rushed onto the span again, stepping over their slain friends, yelling battle screams that had rung from Vienna's ramparts. This is where champions and cowards exposed themselves. A Janissary leader named Mehmet guided the third rush himself, blade in grasp, his troops following despite the clear suicide mission. They reached 3/4 across before Wallachian rifle fire burst from hidden spots. Mehmet dropped with 3 balls in his torso, his corpse tumbling into the bog to join hundreds of others. The morning's fight had run less than 2 hours, but already the bridge entries were paved with Ottoman corpses. The swamp fluids flowed crimson. Hurt men screamed in Turkish, Arabic, and a dozen other tongues of the realm. And still, the Ottoman leadership shoved more people forward. Then Sinan took the choice that would stalk Ottoman war history. Sinan Pasha's command rang out through the Ottoman tents. Dispatch Hassan Pasha's riders, locate another ford, flank them. It was a solid tactical choice that would morph into a strategic wreck. As 8,000 of the empire's best cavalry wheeled away from the lethal bridge, the primary attack kicked off in earnest. The Grand Vizier had settled on crushing power. No more testing jabs. He directed 30,000 men ahead at once. The earth vibrated under the mass of this human landslide. But the true instrument wasn't iron or powder. It was the landscape Michael had picked. As thousands of Ottoman fighters pushed toward the crossing, the swamp exposed its lethal character. What had appeared as firm turf melted under the burden of armored troops. Soldiers found themselves knee-deep, then waist-deep in slimy water, their heavy gear becoming death warrants. The Wallachian guns had waited for this instant, as Ottoman troops bunched up in the natural chute formed by the marsh and woods. Every cannon fired together. The ruin was instant and ghastly. Solid rounds cut bloody paths through dense crowds. Men simply vanished, turned to red fog by direct strikes.
The mental blow was even heavier. Troops at the back, unable to view what was occurring, kept shoving ahead, forcing their friends into the grinder. Then Michael himself joined the clash, donning unique armor and swinging his fabled double-headed axe. He guided 2,000 riders in a crushing rush across the span. This was not the frantic stand of a trapped lord. This was planned violence. The Ottomans, squeezed together and unable to shift, could not shape proper defense lines. Michael's axe lifted and dropped like a rhythm of doom, each sweep felling another foe. His arrival energized the Wallachian troops, who surged ahead with fresh rage. What ensued was not battle, it was tragedy. Ottoman fighters shoved from the rear and struck from the front had nowhere to go but into the bog. The fortunate ones perished fast from Wallachian steel. The unlucky ones, dragged down by plating and kits, drowned slowly in 3 feet of dirty water. The bridge grew so blocked with corpses that living warriors were compelled to climb over their slain friends, only to be hacked down in turn. But here is the nuance that alters everything. While the main Ottoman host was perishing at the bridge, a smaller Wallachian squad had looped through the timber. Guided by a Moldavian officer named Radu, these 500 riders hit the Ottoman base itself. They were not seeking food or gold. They were after something far more precious, the Ottoman gun park. As Sinan's focus was locked on the bridge fiasco, Radu's men overran the poorly watched cannons. Within moments, they had disabled or seized 15 pieces of Ottoman artillery, turning the empire's own arms into worthless scrap. The opening stage had lasted 90 minutes. The bridge entries were rugged with Ottoman dead. The bog had taken hundreds more. Wallachian casualties were slight, maybe 200 killed and hurt. But the fight was far from finished. Through his spyglass, Michael noticed dust plumes to the south. Sinan Pasha's horsemen had located a shallow crossing 2 miles downriver. Sinan Pasha was the Ottoman Empire's top cavalry general. His riders had broken legions from Persia to Poland. As they splashed across the lower ford, he permitted himself a second of content. The Wallachian side was open. In minutes, his riders would roll up their line like a rug. The bridge guards would be trapped between hammer and anvil. The uprising would cease before noon. But Michael held one more card to play. Concealed in the woods, Albert Kirali's 3,000 Sekali fighters had waited for 3 hours. These highland brawlers knew Ottoman methods intimately. Their kin had battled Turkish invaders for centuries. As Hassan's riders reorganized after fording the stream, expecting to confront panicked foot soldiers, they instead encountered a barrier of veteran warriors stepping from the trees. The impact was colossal. Ottoman curved swords met Sekali axes in a brawl that observers called hell made real. But the Ottoman cavalry, splendid in open plain fights, found themselves at a deadly handicap in the rough earth near the timber. Mounts tripped on roots and rotting logs. The narrow gaps between trees voided their speed edge. Worse, the Sekali battled with a synchronized rage that spoke of careful plotting, not frantic survival. History turned on what occurred next. As Hassan's supreme riders found themselves stuck in forest combat, Michael performed a move that would be reviewed in war colleges centuries later. He withdrew half his bridge force, 3,000 men, and sent them running to back the Sekali.
This should have been suicide, thinning his main spot while the Ottoman rush continued. Instead, it was brilliance. The Ottoman troops at the bridge, seeing Wallachian soldiers pulling back, surged ahead with fresh hope. Finally, the foe was cracking. They pushed onto the span with frantic bravery, their captains pledging huge bounties for the first men across. They shoved through their own dead, ignored the ceaseless cannon fire, and actually gained the far bank in serious numbers. Then, the snare snapped with crushing accuracy. The withdrawing Wallachians suddenly spun around. Fresh units appeared from hidden holes. The Ottoman tip of the spear, drained from battling across the corpse-jammed bridge, faced a counterstrike they could not withstand. As they attempted to pull back, they found the bridge jammed by their own backup troops shoving ahead. Panic spread like wildfire, yet the battle's weirdest turn was still to come. On the southern edge, Sinan Pasha's cavalry was falling apart. The mix of Wallachian fury and Wallachian backup had turned an orderly pullback into a flight. Ottoman riders, the dread of Europe, fled through the swamp, many drowning as their mounts tripped in the treacherous soil. Hassan himself, hurt by a vicious axe blow, barely got away with a few guards. The Ottoman command chain started to fracture. Junior leaders could not speak through the disorder. Squads got mixed commands or no commands at all. Some pushed on, others fell back, birthing a martial catastrophe of epic scale. The bridge turned into a shrine of loss, where Ottoman military fame went to perish. Michael, observing from his saddle, saw his instant. The Ottoman troops were divided, broken and headless in many spots. Their guns were taken, their riders scattered, their infantry dying by hundreds in a fight they no longer grasped. It was time for the killing stroke, for God and Wallachia. Michael's war shout rang across the bog as he guided his private guard in the day's closing, devastating rush. This was not merely another assault. This was the material of myth. The prince himself, axe spinning in lethal loops, sliced through Ottoman files like a vessel through waves. Following him came 1,000 of Wallachia's best fighters, men who would expire before backing down. The mental shock was immediate and total. Ottoman warriors, already crushed by hours of butchery, saw their enemy's top general personally leading the strike. In their own host, such risk by leadership was impossible. Where was Sinan Pasha? Where were the Ottoman chiefs? The reply would soon stun both sides. As Michael's charge crashed into the Ottoman middle, the impossible occurred. The Sultan's holy flag, the sacred banner that had guided Islamic hosts for ages, shook and dropped. A Wallachian fighter named Stanchu, whose name earns memory, cut down the flag carrier and grabbed the standard. For Ottoman soldiers, this wasn't just a battlefield setback, it was a cosmic disaster. Allah's flag in Christian grip. The mental hit smashed what was left of Ottoman spirit. Then arrived the noise that stalked survivors for decades, the loud snap of fracturing wood. The bridge, weakened by hours of fighting and the mass of thousands of men, started to give way. Ottoman soldiers still crossing fell into the bog, their yells joining the noise of war. The only exit path was vanished. This singular instant would haunt Sinan eternally. The Grand Vizier, riding forward to rally his men, found his steed tripping in the marsh. The beast, crazed by the scent of gore and the chaos of combat, flung the second most potent man in the Ottoman Empire into 3 feet of slimy water. Sinan Pasha, dragged down by parade armor, began to sink. What ensued next remains one of history's major riddles. A nameless servant, history notes neither his title nor birth, saw his lord thrashing in the fen. Here was liberty offered by destiny itself.
The man who had possessed him was drowning. Nobody would know if he merely walked off. Instead, this ignored hero dove into the water and hauled Sinan to safety. His choice saved the Ottoman command head from total loss and likely stopped an even bigger Christian win. Michael himself was now only yards from the Ottoman leadership group. Wallachian records stated he personally felled 3 Janissary captains trying to shield their bosses. His axe, crimson with gore, had become a tool of holy justice in the view of his troops. Ottoman defense did not just snap, it vaporized. The retreat turned into a rout, then a slaughter. Ottoman fighters tossed away arms, plating, anything that might delay them. They stomped their own hurt men in a frantic bid to flee. The swamp took hundreds more as drained men in heavy gear tried to run through the dangerous earth. Wallachian riders chased without pause, cutting down runners without pity. The next 60 seconds would set the fate of states. Michael confronted a vital choice. His troops were spread across miles of kill zone, drained from 6 hours of heavy war.
The Ottoman camp, loaded with loot, lay almost open. But somewhere in that mess, 60,000 fresh Ottoman soldiers remained unused. Pushed too far, a win could turn into a wreck. "Reform the ranks," Michael's command rang out. "Let them go." It was the judgment that labeled him a grand general rather than merely a bold one. The chase was halted. Wallachian troops began the grim task of securing their win. The Battle of Călugăreni was finished. The Ottoman era of invincibility had sunk in Romanian muck. The sun was scarcely past its peak, but the swampy flat of Călugăreni had become an open-air morgue. As the final Ottoman runner splashed frantically through the blood-tinted waters, Michael the Brave assessed a triumph that mocked all martial reason. The bridge that had pledged Ottoman fame had become a tombstone to their shame, blocked with so many corpses that the Nejlov River had actually altered its path, hunting new routes through the fen. The urgent job was stopping a counterblow. Michael's captains pleaded with him to chase, to switch tactical win into strategic erasure. The Ottoman base lay nearly open. Its sentries were either run off or dead. Inside waited the war funds of the realm, gold enough to pay for Wallachia's safety for years. More vitally, Sinan Pasha himself was somewhere in that disorder, hurt and exposed. One more shove might cease Ottoman sway in the Balkans forever. But destiny had a warped sense of comedy. Even as Wallachian fighters started stripping the slain and caring for their hurt, Ottoman drums started pounding in the distance. The uncommitted backup, 60,000 fresh warriors, were finally shifting. Michael's spies signaled huge blocks nearing from the east. The Grand Vizier, rescued by his nameless servant, had succeeded in rallying the rest of his host. This is where martial brilliance split from simple bravery. Michael commanded an instant tactical pullback. His troops objected. They had won. The ground was theirs. But their lord grasped what they did not. His 15,000 men, now cut to maybe 13,000 able fighters, were spent, low on powder, and spread over miles of ground. The Ottoman reserves were rested, angry, and still largely outnumbered the Wallachians. The retreat was a work of art in controlled withdrawal. Wallachian squads pulled back in order, each guarding the others. The seized Ottoman guns, 15 rare bronze cannons, were hauled away by drafted horses. The Sultan's flag, that priceless token of Ottoman shame, was carefully saved. Even the hurt were moved, borne on made-up stretchers by their friends. But the true win was scripted in Ottoman gore. As grave teams later toiled to clear the slaughter zone, the size of the wreck became clear. Safe guesses put Ottoman deaths at 10,000 to 15,000 killed and sunk. Some records claim the count hit 20,000.
The supreme Janissary corps had been hollowed out. Hassan Pasha's riders, the best horsemen in the realm, had lost a third of their power. Wallachian deaths, maybe 1,000 dead, 2,000 hurt, a 10-to-1 kill rate that belonged in legend, not war history. But figures alone could not catch the fight's true shock. The Ottoman Empire's vibe of unbeatability, carefully grown over 2 centuries of war, had been smashed in 6 hours. Here is what the Ottoman records tried to bury. The mental ruin was worse than the body count. Janissaries, who had rushed the walls of Constantinople itself, had run from Romanian farmers. The Sultan's holy flag was vanished, taken away as a prize. Sinan Pasha, the fear of 3 continents, had almost drowned in 3 feet of dirty water, saved only by a slave's grace. The immediate wake exposed nature on both sides. Michael banned the torture or killing of Ottoman captives, a stunning show of Christian grace in an era of holy war. Ottoman hurt were given the identical medical care as Wallachian troops. Even more strangely, when Sinan's private items were located left on the field, including notes from the Sultan himself, Michael commanded them sent back under a flag of peace. But winning took its toll in odd ways.
As Wallachian fighters looted Ottoman bodies, they found something upsetting. Many of the slain were not Turkish at all. They were Christians, Serbs, Bulgarians, Greeks, even some Romanians, all forced into Ottoman duty. Men who shared their creed had perished trying to crush their liberty. The ethical purity of Christian versus Muslim crumbled into the messy truth of empire versus freedom. The seized Ottoman guns exposed another mystery. These were not just any cannons. Several carried the stamps of Christian factories, sold to the Ottomans by traders who prized coin over creed. The same European nations that declared themselves shields of Christendom had supplied its foes. Michael commanded these specific guns melted down, their iron recast into church bells that would peal Wallachia's liberty. As dusk arrived on August 23, 1595, the total weight of what had happened began to settle. A state everyone had marked as dead had bloodied the nose of the globe's strongest realm. David had not merely confronted Goliath, he had left him leaking in the dirt. News raced like flame across Europe. In Vienna, the Habsburg king got the report with stunned shock. In Rome, the Pope commanded Te Deum sung in every chapel. In Constantinople, Sultan Mehmed III would reportedly scream for days when told of the fiasco. But Michael recognized the reality. This wasn't a finale, it was a start. As he viewed the sundown color the marsh red, strangely copying the day's butchery, he was already plotting the next steps. The Ottoman Empire would come back, tougher and more driven. Today's win had purchased time, nothing more. The query was, would it be sufficient? Winning the clash would prove simpler than winning the campaign. The Battle of Călugăreni rings through time as one of war's major riddles, a tactical gem that could not stop strategic loss. Within months, Ottoman reinforcements would compel Michael to quit Bucharest. Within years, the victor of Călugăreni would perish, murdered. His vision of a joined Romanian land stayed unfinished. Yet the 6 hours of August 23, 1595, had altered something core in the bond between empire and state, between master and subject. Modern armies review Călugăreni as a primer on terrain use. Michael's employment of the marsh-bridge mix forged what experts call a force multiplier, making every guard worth 6 or 7 invaders. His gun sighting, analyzed through dig sites, shows mathematical exactness that wouldn't be out of place in a 20th-century defensive plan. The managed retreat after winning shows strategic brains rarely viewed in medieval leaders drunk on field glory. But this loss stalked Ottoman maps for decades. Never again would they misjudge Romanian fight. Never again would they presume that having more men ensured the win. The return of the Sultan's flag eventually happened through talks, but forever stained by capture, it became a token of Ottoman weakness that fed uprisings from the Balkans to the Arab lands. For Romanian national soul, Călugăreni became holy earth. The abbey Michael erected in thanks still remains, its bells poured from seized Ottoman bronze, still tolling across the fields. Every August 23rd, Romanians recall the date when their forebears showed that guts and wit could humble a realm. The fight entered myth, expanding with each version until Michael's axe could cleave 3 foes with 1 strike, and the bog 8 whole Ottoman legions. The deeper moral goes beyond flag or time. Călugăreni demonstrates that martial sway exists only within definite frames. Shift the frame, force the foe to battle where their edges become flaws, and David can truly beat Goliath. The Ottomans brought the incorrect army to the incorrect spot, shoved ahead by systemic pride that mixed fame with truth. Ponder what this signals for any era's ruling powers. The British Empire learned it in American woods. Napoleon learned it in Spanish hills. The lesson loops.
Whenever martial power meets firm resistance on picked ground, tech shifts, empires climb and crash. But the core fact stays. The frail can beat the mighty by declining to battle on the mighty's terms. Now you grasp why 15,000 beat 100,000, not through magic help, but through smart use of every potential edge. Michael the Brave converted Wallachian flaws into Ottoman wrecks. Scarce troops became focused fire. Defensive spots became attacking chances. Even the flight became victory guarding. The Ottoman Empire would last for another 3 centuries, but something perished in that Romanian bog. The legend of sure Ottoman rule drowned alongside thousands of Janissaries. Christian Europe, viewing in awe, grasped the Sultan's legions could be whipped not just by major states, but by anyone with the nerve and brain to attempt. Ultimately, Călugăreni signals us that history turns on instants of wild bravery. When 15,000 men stood against 100,000, they were not just holding a bridge or a state. They were showing that the human soul, rightly guided and placed, can beat any odds. The swamp that took so many lives also fed a myth that liberty, however outnumbered, can win over empire, making this not an ending, but a beginning.